Welcome to the first of our Family History Days, and also to the Cornwall Family History Society members that have joined us today. We have a packed programme today. We've got Mr. Eric Bush back there. He's the representative from the Cayman Islands Embassy. We welcome him and his team today. I must point out that there will be a video taken of his talk, so if those members don't wish to be in that sort of part of the room, if they wouldn't mind just moving to another end, the back of the room. The team then wish to have two members who would like to answer some questions on the Cayman Islands and the connection with the Cornish settlers. I think have you done that? A couple already. This is Kate, by the way.
Please do come and see me. You've got some interesting questions. If you wanted to be on the video, please let me know.
We'll break for lunch around about 12:15, and you'll probably hear the smell the pasties, and Liz pulling her hair out at the same time. During the lunch, we're going to have, at 1 o'clock, we're going to have an AGM, and Sir John Trelawney is coming here at 12, so he'll be in the chair, which will last for 20 minutes, hopefully, not too long anyway. And then we'll reconvene at 1:45 with Simon Fowler, who will talk about the brewery and publican ancestry. Well, I hope you have a great day, and hope it's interesting and a change from the normal as well. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Eric Bush, representative from the Cayman Islands.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Carol. Good morning. What an absolute pleasure it is to come and speak to you today. As I was explaining earlier, the last time I was invited to give a presentation or a speech that was 50 minutes or longer. It was about immigration reform in the Cayman Islands, and it was in my previous life as the Permanent Secretary responsible for immigration. So it was a very different topic. It was a very different audience because, of course, immigration reform can be quite personal, can be quite contentious. So I must say it is an absolute pleasure to be here today to talk about the thing that I love, and that is the Cayman Islands. So I do have to apologize. I will have to sit down because I do have some notes on my laptop. So I hope you don't mind. I'll take a seat. Today's presentation is very much designed to be about in the form of a conversation. I was never a very good student in the traditional sense because I don't do very well when people talk at me. I do very well when I have a conversation, and that, if you would be so kind as to, if you do have questions, comments, or want to insert your own stories, please feel free to do so at any point of the presentation. So, if I may, first I wanted to thank and introduce the team that has made this presentation possible. Of course, we have Kate Kandaya, who we all see in front. In the back, there's Philippa and Charles in the back, the members of the team. And we have Johnny from Dragon Consulting. So I just want to say thank you to all of them for coming, and thank you for all of the effort in putting this together. So, why Cayman? And why Cornwall? So, early on in my role here as representative for the Cayman Islands to the United Kingdom, the problem that I had was that when I was speaking to politicians, business people, and just the general public, there was a lack of connection between the Cayman Islands and the UK. So that then led naturally to further research about the Cayman Islands from my office. And through that, we found a distinct connection with Cornwall. And I will take you through that journey through this speech. But my role in the UK and that of the representative office is very much a diplomatic function. So we are not called ambassadors or high commissioners simply because the Cayman Islands is British and we choose to remain British. And again, I'll go into that in further detail. But as today is about family and family history, I specifically want to talk about Isaac Bodden and where he came from and where his family lay today. Excuse me. So the Cayman Islands specifically is a group of 3 small islands in the Caribbean. Today we boast a population of about 65,000 people. 50% of that are Caymanians and 50% are expatriates. And out of that expatriate pool, we have over 135 different nationalities represented in our 3 small islands of 65,000 people. And you know, it truly is amazing to see how 65,000 people from 135 different nationalities just coexist and live in general harmony and peace and tranquility. That's one of the notable things I noticed moving from Cayman to London. Obviously Cayman is very small, size of a village, but the warmth of the people and the reception in which you naturally receive when you're new to the island, I've been told, you know, it's so natural. And I must admit, whilst I love London, I didn't receive that. You know, London is a very big city. I found the interaction to be quite transactional, quite, you know, there always has to be a purpose for the conversation. It just can't be familiar and just sort of cordial. But that was totally different when I went to Cornwall for 2 days. And I must tell you that the reception that I felt instantly as I landed in Truro and as we went to the different areas of Cornwall for 2 days, the warmth and the natural feeling of welcome was there. And it whilst I'd never been to Cornwall before, and it did resemble the feeling of home. So I can't explain that other than that's the feeling. I'm even tingling now as I talk about it. But yeah, it was quite familiar. It was awesome. So the Cayman Islands itself, we've had a very interesting past. We have been British for 360 years. Today, we enjoy one of the lowest crime rates in the Caribbean. We appreciate and enjoy a stable and effective parliamentary system, as well as we're able to boast one of the highest gross domestic products per capita. And for the gentleman signing, I apologize for my stuttering. It must be difficult. The economy is based on 2 main pillars, that of financial services and luxury tourism. In the past 4 decades, Cayman has risen to become one of the most important financial centers in the world and is consistently ranked in the leading center of investment funds. People don't understand how Cayman, as a small island nation, has done so well, has such a large global footprint on financial services. And that is something that it's our responsibility, certainly within the UK, to address head on and discuss and answer whatever questions people have. Because when we are assessed by global bodies that assess the UK, Germany, Australia, Canada, the United States, we are always rated equally or better than those jurisdictions that I've just mentioned when it comes to transparency, when it comes to addressing any form of criminality or tax evasion, etc. But that's our role. But people, in large part, just don't understand how we've done so well. And I think through this conversation of telling you where we've come from and showing you our grit and our backbone, you'll see why. So Cayman, not being able to produce anything on its own, we import over 90% of all of our food and goods, and of course 50% of our labor. The proper term of when you're speaking of Cayman, it's either Cayman or the Cayman Islands. It's never the Caymans. So I appreciate that. And now I'd like to take you on a journey, having talked a little bit about Cayman, and show you who we are. So, who wants to go?
Direct connection with Penzance. I'm glad for Penzance now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what we tried to show is the geographical location here between Cornwall, specifically Penzance, specifically to Grand Cayman. The 19 plus hours is representative of the 2 flights it would take from Penzance or Cornwall to London, and then London direct to the Cayman Islands. It's about an 11-hour flight from London, and British Airways services that 4 days a week. Just a little plug. But of course, prior to aviation advancements, and certainly the Cornish link to Cayman that we will speak about, it would have taken them some 6 to 8 weeks to leave Cornwall to get to the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands consists of 3 small islands: Grand Cayman, Cayman Brac, and Little Cayman. Collectively, they make up about 100 square miles. They are 270 miles south of Cuba, 440 miles south of Miami, and about 270 miles northwest of Jamaica. Georgetown is the capital of the Cayman Islands, which is located in Grand Cayman. There are no rivers in any of the islands, thus no natural flowing fresh water, and the coasts are largely protected offshore by reefs And most of the undeveloped areas still consist of mangroves, which you saw some of. And I must say, I'm quite proud that although we have developed quite a lot in the last 50 to 60 years, we still, I think we've struck the right balance in ensuring that there is development for the economy, but also saving the environment and respecting the ecology and biodiversity that we were naturally given. Cayman now, in between Grand Cayman and Cayman Brac, there is one of the deepest places in the world, and it's called the Cayman Trench. And that is due to the fact that between the Cayman Islands, we are on two major tectonic plates. And because of that, we're prone to earthquakes. The last major earthquake that hit us was in 2004. And that was the same year that Hurricane Ivan, Category 5 storm, passed and battered Cayman. And if you'll bear with me on that, I do have a funny story about the earthquake and my experience of that 6.8 magnitude event. So at that time, I was the general manager of one of our hotels, and it was in December, and we were celebrating, we were having a Christmas party, and the way in which we were celebrating at that time in December was on the beach. And it was a nice barbecue in the afternoon, and I'll never forget it. I was speaking to one of the housekeepers. Her name was Irene Munn, and she was a short little Jamaican lady, and I'm 6'4", so I was looking down at her, and I had a drink, and as she was talking, I felt this shaking, as if sort of off balance, and I looked down at my cup, and I'm like, no, I haven't drank that much. And I looked back at her, and everything just sort of stopped. And okay, so we just continued on the conversation. So about half an hour later, we wrapped up, and then we all went back to the hotel. And the hotel now is five stories tall, and all 304 guests had evacuated the hotel at that point because they had been shaken by this 6.8 magnitude earthquake. And here I was enjoying a nice beverage, talking to Irene Munn, thinking that it was just, too strong. So I just put it down. So I just thought I'd share that with you. So to the real crux of why we're here. Of course, the very popular show on British TV, Who Do You Think You Are? And tracing our roots in the Cornish connection. Although the Cayman Islands today is widely recognized around the world, there is a gap when it comes to a clear narrative of our history and where we came from. Cayman's history, as you will see, is rich and full of wonderful stories, from Christopher Columbus, piracy tales, to mythical creatures. I must say we do have it all. It all began, though, with a Cornishman called Bodden, or Bodden. We spell Bodden B-O-D-D-E-N, but what we believe and through our research, the original Bodden should have been spelled B-A-W-D-E-N. It's incredible to think that there are Cornish men and women who do not realize that their ancestors helped found a country in the Caribbean some 360 years ago. They could be from Truro, Penzance, or Bodmin, and their long-lost cousins are 5,000 miles away, having made a new life and created their own Cornwall in the Caribbean. This was the driver of our campaign to trace our roots to the islands and set about trying to find ancestors of the first Bodden. Our initial research was done by looking through archives and searching sites like Ancestry.com. Research has shown that there are about 100 people with the Bodden, B-O-D-D-E-N, last name living in Britain, and around 1,500 original Boddens, B-A-W-D-E-N, across the country, but with a very high concentration in Cornwall. In April 2017, we set off to the Duchy on our journey to connect to our past. Our mission was threefold: to find any possible relatives to the original Bodens, to strengthen the links between Cornwall and Cayman, and to foster closer ties going forward. And lastly, hopefully to tell a wonderful story. We set out on our mission. One of the first obstacles, though, was the obvious lack of data that was generated or kept. And unfortunately, even the data that was recorded, the majority of it was lost in the 1970s when we had a fire at our government administration building in the Cayman Islands. However, to help us on our quest, we've enlisted the help of the West India Committee, which was founded in 1735 and the oldest body representative of the Commonwealth. In 2017, they began a comprehensive research program to document and write the history of the Cayman Islands. Now, this material, once complete, will be used for educational purposes in the Cayman Islands and in the UK, and we hope in Cornwall specifically. We'll be using these materials in some of the forthcoming initiatives, and I hope we will get back down to Cornwall shortly to visit some of the schools and colleges and to tell the local people and students about us. Perhaps next year we can continue the conversation and invite one of the original Bodens to give this talk. So as I said, in 2017, talked about the very warm reception that I felt, and not least was this from Scott Mann, one of your local MPs. Scott and I met, and again, it was instant. And I must admit, I've met a lot of UK politicians here, from various parts, from members of Parliament to Lords, and Scott just came across as a very genuine individual who wanted to know more and was very interested to find out more and help in areas that he could about uncovering the Cayman Cornish connection. And over the 2 days, the amount of positive press coverage that we received, certainly from a Cayman perspective within the UK, was unprecedented. I think within the 24-hour period, we were covered in the radio many times, in the Telegraph, in the Times, national press, as well as local media. And we just want to show a short clip of, I think, BBC's coverage of the trip itself.
Now, what do you think the Caribbean and Cornwall have in common? The beaches, maybe? Fishing, perhaps? Well, a representative from the Caribbean is in the county looking for descendants of the first inhabitant of their island.
It was a Cornishman who set foot on the Cayman Islands 363 years ago, and now the island's representative in the UK is seeking direct descendants of a man who was called Bodden or Borden. The islanders are hoping to promote business and cultural links with the county.
Well, Spotlight's Cornwall reporter David George wishes we'd sent him to the Caribbean, but instead we sent him to Heron Porth.
The Cayman Islands are a British overseas territory, south of Cuba and west of Jamaica. There are around 60,000 inhabitants, and the first one, in 1654, was apparently a Cornishman called Isaac Bodden, whose grandfather had gone to the Caribbean as part of Cromwell's army.
What we're here to do, essentially, is to start the dialogue and start the research to see if we can actually find the individual who left Cornwall, who went to the Caribbean and finally settled in the Cayman Islands.
We took the Cayman Islands top man in the UK to see one of our beaches.
People are here on Easter break. They're enjoying the natural beauty of the sun, the sand, and the sea. Very much like Cayman, where the Cornwall has a lot of natural beauty and similar to Cayman.
Time for some proper protocol, a gift of food for the visiting dignitary.
It looks very much like a big version of what we call in Cayman a patty, which with your pastry and some sort of meat or vegetable or potato on the inside. Yeah, this is either a breakfast or a lunch favorite for us back home.
Some of these go back to the 1530s when the perfumes were kept.
This is Cornwall's County Records Archive. Somewhere in here could be the details of Cayman's first inhabitant.
Some of the parish registers for some of the Cornish parishes do not survive much before 1700. But if it has survived, we will find it. I promise that.
The hope is to set up a joint research project. Now, apparently some Cayman dialect words have links to Cornish ones, like directly.
We do have a saying in Cayman called "coming directly,"
Oh,
and that means soon come.
yes, well that's
So
very
it's-
soon.
it's-
Say it again for us.
It's coming directly.
The one-man Cayman delegation will visit the Cornish Pirates rugby team and a brewery directly. David George, BBC Spotlight, Herrenport.
Actually, looked pretty good in Herrenport there, didn't it? Well, Roy Bodden is the president of the University of the Cayman Islands, and I asked him how obvious the connections with Cornwall are on the Cayman Islands themselves.
Well, that's a good question because I don't think that there has been any kind of examination of the connection with Cornwall. I know that many Caymanians trace their ancestors back to different places in the UK, but I don't think that any of them, certainly that I can recall previously, delved to any great extent into their ancestral connections.
What do you hope will come out of this search that's now underway in Cornwall to find members of the family that were the founding family, if you like, of the Cayman Islands?
Well, you know, I think that's good. I sense when I go to the archives, I see Caymanians there trying to trace their genealogical roots. They want to find out now who we really are. As I understand it, the first Bodden was an old man called Isaac Bodden, who settled in a place in East End named Old Isaac after him. Supposedly these people were white. So now, how do you get people like, of my color being Boddens? Well, the simple explanation for that is that when these people came, they came with their slaves. And the nature of slavery in the Cayman Islands, the nature of slavery probably in the Caribbean was, in many instances, the slaves took the names of their masters. So that's how come you have Boddens who are white, Boddens who are black, and all shades of the spectrum.
Well, it's a fascinating link. I'm hoping one day I can come and visit you and explore the link between Cornwall and the Cayman Islands even more. In the meantime, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
It is so interesting, and if
Yeah. So that was just a snapshot of some of the work that has happened, that we started last year, and we continue. So as I mentioned, according to local legend, the first settlers in the Cayman Islands was a Cornishman called Bodden and a Welshman called Watler, both said to have been members of Cromwell's forces in the West Indies. Bodden was one of 3,000 Marines who sailed as part of Oliver Cromwell's Western Design expedition to the Caribbean to attack Spanish colonies in 1655. This was at the height of the Anglo-Spanish War, and their mission was to capture and recapture as many territories as they could. Bodden and Watler were likely to have been deserters from Cromwell's force when they landed on what is now Grand Cayman. Unable to read or write, their names were subsequently morphed into Bodden, B-O-D-D-E-N, and Watler. Bodden was part of a large number of Cornishmen who were enlisted as Marines, and I love how that is translated today, because if you research how Cromwell and actually recruited his Marines, it certainly doesn't transform into the way in which people are enlisted today. It was more like our Premier Alden McLaughlin has a funny story in that the way in which his ancestor was taken to the Cayman Islands was he was actually an Irishman, And he went to a pub one evening, I guess drank too much and fell asleep. The next morning he woke up and he was on a ship to the Caribbean. So, enlisted. But the way in which it's understood that the Cornishmen were selected was because of the seafaring expertise and sheer resilience and hardness that they had. Again, these traits we see and have seen through Cayman's history, and it's very evident today. Little, if anything, is known about what happened after Bodden settled on the islands, but he clearly survived. And in 1734, his grandson, as Roy Bodden said, Isaac Bodden became the first officially recorded inhabitant. Isaac was married to another Caymanian, Sarah Lamar, and his name had been given to the settlement Old Isaacs in Grand Cayman. Now, I'll also say, as Cayman progressed and it was further populated, the first capital of the Cayman Islands, it is Georgetown now, but it used to be Boddentown, and Boddentown is still very much a prominent district in Grand Cayman. So the early settlers made a small living from catching turtles and other types of fishing, growing crops, and raising pigs. Many early settlers also seem to have come in search of mahogany. A very hard wood, mahogany has always been valued for making high quality furniture and fittings. People cut mahogany and send it to Jamaica for manufacturing and then on to England. So if anybody has any family heirlooms of mahogany, it may have some Caymanian links if it goes back that far. Most settlers in the Cayman Islands were subsistence farmers, meaning that they really didn't have a lot. They grew just enough to feed themselves, as production of fruits, vegetables, and even livestock was very minimal. This meant essentially that the Cayman Islands in the early days was very poor. So the Cornish connections from aspects to our language, as discussed in the video, and dialect, to boat building, to fishing, to salvaging, to innovative cooking and distinctive music, Caymanians have, in essence, been living like Cornish men and women, but in the middle of the Caribbean. During our journey last year, we discovered many shared similarities and connections. The first, of course, is the natural beauty and surround of the sea. As you've seen by the two videos that we've played, the ocean in Cayman has been and continues to be a center point in the way we live, a major part of our industry, and we instantly see the connection there with Cornwall. That also means the hardness, if you will, and determined spirit that one has to have having gone to sea, you know, and this is something that certainly in Cayman's history has just changed in my generation. So my father's family has been in the Cayman Islands since 1750s. I am the first generation of the Bushes in our line to not go to sea, although this posting could be sort of determined as a win. But Bush, the Bush name, as I said, started in the 1750s in the Cayman Islands. I don't know if it's from Cornish descent. The Bush name certainly isn't. That was very much born in the 1750s, simply because what we do know is that he was a sailor in the Royal Navy. And as the fleet was crossing the Cayman Islands, I guess he said he had enough, or fell off, I don't know. But anyway, something happened and he was no longer on the ship, and he actually swam ashore in the Cayman Islands, in Grand Cayman, in a place we call South Sound. And We do know his name was Charles Christopher, but we don't know his family name. And as the islanders, there would have been about 400 at the time, found him and questioned him about where he came from, who he was, his family ties, etc., he refused to tell them. So the islanders, being always ever the officials, gave them a name. And because they found him in the bush, they called him Charles Christopher Bush. And I can trace my father's line straight back to him, but unfortunately that's where it stops. I've tried to do some personal research on that, but I haven't broken through that barrier yet. As I said, through this exercise, the office is going through various websites and through the research, but I've taken up a hobby myself, and for Christmas my wife gave me an Ancestry.com DNA kit. And it's interesting because my father, I know his history very well, and that's very well documented up until the 1750s. However, my mother is adopted, and she's American, so she doesn't know her father and mother. So it was quite interesting, the result. And the way in which the DNA results work is they tell you, well, you have a certain percentage of this area and a certain percentage of that area, etc. And it came back that I was 43% British and 39% Western European, with the rest being XXYY, whatever that is. But you know, even though my father's family has been there for 300 years, it's interesting to show just from a cellular level the connection I have with Britain. So just thought I'd share that little personal. So, of course, we talk about continue with the Cornish connections, and we have to talk about the pirates. Prince Philip, when he was retiring, or he gave notice to retire, I should say, there was a lot of press coverage about his 70-plus year career. And in that press coverage was a lot of, what was it, his top 10 gaffes. Because of course that's what he's known for. And I think the number one was about telling British students that they can't stay in China too long unless their eyes shape. But the third was proudly, the third was in the Cayman Islands, talking to our head of government at the time, and where he said, well, don't you all just come from a bunch of pirates anyway? So, but maybe we do, never know. But we're making the most of it. But much like Cornwall, Cayman has a strong association with piracy and the golden age of pirates. Whilst it is clear that pirates operated around the Cayman Islands, and like other European sailors, they probably stopped there to get food and water, there was no evidence that any pirate called the Cayman Islands home. In 1717, pirates captured a small ship off Grand Cayman. They were led by a man by the name of Edward Teach, otherwise known as Blackbeard, the most famous pirate of them all. However, this was very early in Blackbeard's career, and there is evidence to show that he used Cayman as a staging point, although not as a base. Other instances of pirates on the island include Morning Star, a pirate ship under the command of Thomas Anstis, running aground on the island, and many of its crew were captured shortly after by the Royal Navy. The pirates Ned Lowe and George Lowther also established their partnership on Grand Cayman. The last pirate known to have operated in the Cayman Islands during the golden age of piracy was Neil Walker in 1730, who stole a considerable amount of treasure from ships that had been wrecked on the islands. However, piracy has occurred more recently in the islands, when a Cuban ship was attacked in 1933, and the leader, Gideon Ebanks, hid out in the mangroves in Georgetown, in Grand Cayman from the authorities. However, I will say he was captured by Caymanians and handed over to the appropriate authorities. Just like Penzance, each year we host a Pirates Week festival held in November. It's one of the highest highlights in Cayman's social calendar and a reminder of the island's legendary pirate occupation in the 18th century, which the tales of treasure caches left behind by Blackbeard, Calico Jack, Neil Walker, and Captain Morgan. The next connection obviously has to be the weather. Perhaps on a large scale, the Cayman Islands, like Cornwall, have literally been shaped by its battle with the elements. An unavoidable feature of the Cayman Islands and the Caribbean are large storms and hurricanes. These storms normally form in the summer and autumn months, the hurricane season, between June and November, and the two most infamous hurricanes in Caymanian history are the hurricane of 1932 and Hurricane Ivan 2004, as I mentioned. I just want to talk about the storm of 1932 and just show how, just some 90 years ago, how low grade and low tech the people of Cayman were at that time. So the storm of 1932, the hurricane of 1932, killed over 50 people. The reason it killed over 50 people, was because the majority of the houses on Cayman Brac, if you can envisage it, is a thin island and has a bluff in the middle, a rock formation of about 60 feet. So the majority of the inhabitants lived on the beach and the coastline. When the storm of 32 was coming, because of the history and heritage and seafaring expertise that we had, our forefathers and ancestors could sense that bad weather was coming. So they retreated from their houses into the caves where they thought it was safe. But unfortunately, with the storm surge and the storm coming in as it did, it actually flooded the caves and drowned and killed the individuals. But I'm happy to say now, today, with the use of modern technology, with the connection with the outside world, if I can call it that, even with the horrific storm of Hurricane Ivan, which was a Category 5 storm that battered Cayman for 2 days. There were no deaths recorded or attributed to it. There were 2 subsequent deaths after the storm passed, but none directly. And that's with the population having grown substantially between 1932 and 2004. This is my favorite connection, and that's one of the culture. Just like Cornwall, Cayman culture is rich and diverse, but underlined with a strong sense. Now Johnny set me up on this one, and I know a bit of the history, but with a strong sense of Britishness. Is that still okay to say? No? See, some people are saying yes. See, Johnny, I told you. There are many shared traits with Cornwall, not least food, music, rugby, and our local dialect. One of the most obvious similarities is the Cayman equivalent to the Cornish pasty. We call it the paddy. Usually filled with meat. It's a staple and favorite snack on the islands. I must admit, every time I go back to Cayman, I have a little ritual for breakfast. I go to Island Taste, I have 2 patties, and I'm set for the day. I do love it. And just like Cornwall, we take our pasties and patties very seriously. It's truly a thing of pride for us. And I must say, I'm looking forward to sampling the pasties at lunch. One of the more recent similarities that we have in Cayman, and of course in Cornwall for far longer, is that of the brewing of beer. We're very proud of the Cayman Islands Brewery, and we are actually actively participating in the collaboration of a joint brew, if I can put it that way, between St. Austell's and the Cayman Islands Brewery. So I hope to share that too with each of you, and perhaps next year that can accompany the pasties. As I mentioned, rugby. We're very proud of our rugby team. Although Cayman is very small in size, 65,000 people, we have in the past qualified for the Rugby World Cup, and we also participated in the Rugby Sevens in Hong Kong 2 years ago. So quite proud of that. And lastly, our music. And this is something I must admit I've just learned this week in preparing for this. Music is, of course, one of the connectors of life, no matter who you are. It's one of those things in culture that just naturally brings people together. And in researching who we are and Cayman's history, we naturally talked about our swanky kitchen band. And the traditional Caymanian music is the kitchen band in itself, because the way in which Cayman culture was in the past, the family gatherings would happen during the meal, and the meal would traditionally happen outside, and it would happen near the outside kitchen or caboose. And once the family meal happened, then the individual who could play the fiddle or the violin would bring it out and start with the music. And then others in the family, so moved, would then start using the grater or some sort of drum made out of cow skin or goat skin, and perhaps if they had a guitar. So I'd like to now take you, show you a little video of the Swanky Kitchen Band, which is Cayman's last band, and show you a bit of our music. And I believe you'll find some similarities of some of the music from Cornwall. So obviously it has a Cayman flair to it, but you know, I hope you can see that and sort of picture a very simple time, very long day, a hard day, a hot day filled with mosquitoes, etc., and bringing your family together under the shade of a tree perhaps, and having had your meal, which was largely fish and or turtle, things from the sea, and adding some sort of liveliness and culture. This is how we spent our time. So now I'd like to take you, go back to Cayman's first days, which was in the 1500s. The first recorded sighting of the Cayman Islands was in 1503 by Christopher Columbus. Whilst he didn't stop in the Cayman Islands, it was still noted in his diaries of the abundance of turtles. And as a result of that, the islands were called Las Tortugas. Unlike many Caribbean islands, pre-Columbian artifacts have never been discovered on the islands. Archaeologists have suggested that the Amerindians, who all had excellent maritime skills, and there's much evidence of them traveling throughout the Caribbean, may not have had any interest in permanently settling in the Cayman Islands at that time because of the swamps, the lack of natural fresh water, and the sheer amount of mosquitoes. But in 1586, records indicate that Sir Francis Drake's fleet of 23 ships stopped for 2 days on Grand Cayman. This is the first official, if you will, footsteps recorded in the Cayman Islands. In the journals, it was noted that it was not inhabited, but there was an abundance of crocodiles or alligators or caimans, and a numerous amount of turtles. And at that time, because of the amount of caiman crocodiles, that's when the name was changed to the Cayman Islands. So it was changed from Las Tortugas by Christopher Columbus in 1503 by Sir Francis Drake to the Cayman Islands. I don't know if I'm happy or not, but I just have to say that there's only one Cayman now in the Cayman Islands, and I don't know the reason for that, I must say, but they are quite vicious. So I guess I am happy to say that there's no more Caymans roaming around. So we moved to the 1600s, and of course this was the golden age this is when we started to see the influx and interaction with pirates. But at that time, in 1655, England captures Jamaica from the Spanish, and Cayman is always seen in this context as an annex or a part of Jamaica. In 1658, Bodens and Wattlers first settled in the Cayman Islands. In 1670, under the Treaty of Madrid, Spanish recognizes England's sovereignty over Jamaica and various other Caribbean islands, including the Cayman Islands. And then in the latter part, we start to see more interaction with the pirates, such as Edward Teach or Blackbeard. In the 70s, that's really when Cayman started to become inhabited. And there's numerous records to indicate permanent settlement by the Bodens and by the Wattlers, and we start to see more records of international travelers. In the mid-1700s, there's records showing that the governor of Jamaica would receive mahogany and logwood to be exported to Jamaica. In the mid-1700s, the population at that time was under 150 people. In the 1780s, records show that Cayman started to become known for its shipbuilding and that of our catboats that were used to either fish for turtles, transport turtles, or the exports in cotton and the wood. In 1790, Fort George was constructed to ward off attacks by the French and the Spanish pirates. And then in 1794, and Philippa, we did bring some of the books. There was the Wreck of the 10 Sails, and this is a fascinating story. And we brought a few books for anyone who's interested. Please, they're free of charge. Just the only thing I ask is that once you've read it, pass it on, because we just like to continue having our story discussed. The Wreck of the 10 Sails, including HMS Convert, was a Navy ship leading a convoy of 58 merchantmen. Through bad weather and simply bad navigation, 10 of those ships found their way onto our reefs. Despite the weather being very bad, the population of Cayman being around, I think it was around 300, swam out and went out by boat and saved all of the crew. Nobody died on the reefs. And legend has it, and I will say legend, that there was a member of the royal family aboard that ship, and because of the heroism and courage of saving everybody, not least the individual who was linked to the royal family, legend has it that is when the king at the time designated Cayman as tax-free, and that we would never pay tax. We didn't have to. It was a good thing back in the 1700s because we didn't have anything to pay other than turtle shells, perhaps. In 1798, the first record of a magistrate being appointed by the governor of Jamaica. Then we move on to the 1800s, and the population at that time was numbered less than 1,000, which again, half were slaves. However, in 1834, after the Slavery Abolition Act, and everybody was then considered free. I think this is an important part of Cayman's history. Even though people were the 500 slaves were noted to be free, most, if not all of them, stayed as free men and women and started to make their own lives. Similar to Roy Bodden's family, as he would have mentioned. So, although it would have been a very hard life in Cayman at that time, with no natural resource, with no real industry, it's fascinating for me to see that people that were there by force at that time, once they were freed, they chose to remain and make their own life. During the 1800s, we see their construction and industry and education. In 1831, the government enacted a major education bill that made it law that every district in the Cayman Islands would have to have its own school. Even at that point in time, it was understood how important education was if we wanted to build a true community. Also in the 1800s, we saw the introduction and the introduction of religion in a formal sense, whereby we had visits from missionaries of the Presbyterian and Wesleyan churches. And up here, I wanted to show this picture because this is Elmsley Memorial Church. It's a Presbyterian church, and it was first built in 1846 by Reverend James Elmsley. And of course, it's stone in its walls, but if you can see the roof is made of mahogany, and it's constructed exactly like the hull of a boat, because that's how we knew how to build. We didn't know how to build trusts and to build a proper roof, if I can put it in that way, but it's almost 200 years old, so it's not that bad. But it is a magnificent thing to see. It's not very big, of course, because it was built for a population of less than 1,000 people. But it's an indication of where we were in the 1800s. At the end of the 1800s, in 1898, I guess Jamaica, who had always sort of seen Cayman as this thing, this 3 islands, just leave them alone, they started to see that we had more industry and more relevance. And the governor of Jamaica appointed the first commissioner of the Cayman Islands. And this is how Cayman was governed by Jamaica until 1959. The 1900s saw the introduction in 1937 with the first cruise ship, which also doubled as a mail drop. It was a Royal Mail ship, Atlantis, but it carried 302 passengers. So this we signify as our first tourism boom in the Cayman Islands. In 1939 to 1945, of course, we had the First World War. And for those who, Second World War, excuse me. Yes, it does say second there, so sorry. We formed a home guard, and that consisted of men and women, because Cayman at that time, having a lot of seamen available, they actually enlisted in the Royal Navy itself to fight for Great Britain. In the 1950s, divers put the Cayman Islands on the international map, not least because they discovered all of the natural beauty in which Cayman had and has to offer. In 1953, we opened our first airfield in Grand Cayman, which replaced the seaplane service that we had in the 1940s. And again, in the 50s, we opened our first hospital, and Barclays Bank was the first commercial bank. And then in this millennia, it really is the sort of tale of two cities, because just like most things of extremes, we've had the best and the worst. As I explained, Cayman in the last sort of 50 years has grown from a population of about 8,000 now up to 65,000. And of course, we've had some growing pains in that, in trying to understand how we can easily and effectively, what's the word I want to use? Allow in and welcome over 130 different nationalities, because prior to the 1950s, nobody really wanted to go to Cayman. But through tourism and through international financial services, we've grown our population, and it's certainly, I'm 42 years old, and through my lifetime in Cayman and seeing how it's grown, and the product and the place it is now, where people do live in harmony, in peace, in tranquility, in keeping that Caymanian warmth. It's just a fascinating result, and I don't know how we've done it, but it's fantastic. So now, specifically talking about forging stronger links between Cornwall and the Cayman Islands, this year in particular is a very important year for us. The government of the Cayman Islands is launching a campaign to further raise the awareness, knowledge, and understanding of the relationship that exists between the Cayman Islands and Great Britain generally, and Cornwall specifically. Our mission is to raise awareness of the history of the Cayman Islands and its relationship with the UK by creating a platform of collaboration, education, engagement, and partnership. And of course, it all started in Cornwall last year. As part of this program, we want to continue to build our links with Cornwall. In the coming months, we will hopefully narrow down our search for the descendants of Isaac Bodden, and the plan is then to take the person or persons to the Cayman Islands and to introduce them to some of their long-lost relatives. We hope that this will encourage more direct links between our countries. We would like to look at a possible twinning of towns, and also want to bring our educational program to Cornish schools and colleges. We may look to arrange exchange visits and other partnership ideas. So now moving on to the big celebrations that we have planned. The big part of our efforts this year will be to celebrate the 60-year anniversaries of the Cayman Islands Coat of Arms and our first Constitution. Both events are milestones in the Cayman Islands, as these are two Diamond Jubilee anniversaries, bear witness to the continued close ties to Britain. The Cayman Islands government will be hosting a major celebration on the 14th of May of this year in Durbar Court of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, which will be co-hosted by the Premier of the Cayman Islands and the Foreign Secretary. We hope to have a strong Cornish contingent and element to the event. I'm happy to say we've invited the Cornish Pirates to come in their full spectrum and splendor. In addition to all of the stakeholders we met on our trip last year in the Cornish Pirates, St. Austell's Brewery, and also members of the archive. And with that, I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me here. I truly appreciated talking to you about Cayman, our history. It's one of my favorite topics. And now I'd like to open it up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
Are any towns already twinned? Because that thing on the screen said something about 3 towns with surprising sisters. So have you got any twins already?
No, the sign was just sort of a prompt, so not yet, and we're looking to do that actively. Yes, ma'am. Any ideas?
Well, Penzance seems an obvious.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Could I have a mic?
Yes.
So,
Well, I'm probably the only Cornishman in this room that has been to the Cayman Islands.
well, has anybody else been to Cayman? No, so you are.
Well, I'll tell people why I went. I was a freelance journalist in the late 60s, early 70s, and the West India Committee, which at that time was a much more powerful economic influence than it is today. They received from the Cayman Islands government an invitation to have a little brochure, a colour brochure, and I contributed to the West Indies Chronicle, and I was going to the West Indies. I think I was writing for the Sunday Times, and so I went to your delightful 3 main islands, one big one and 2 small ones.
That's right.
And I do remember how very, very different it was from the West Indies. In Grand Cayman, all I remember now is a very, very, very long street going down the capital. And people were very nice. And I went to one of your smaller islands. I think it might have been Cayman Bragg. And, superb beach, a wonderful lagoon in front of it. And I put on my mask and I swam and dived around looking for fish, and suddenly I began to be caught by an enormous pull towards the coral reef and the opening. And if I didn't swim very, very fast, I would be ending up in Mexico. So I did that. And so, I have very, very pleasant memories, even though it's decades ago, and I wish you every success.
Thank you.
Now, as far as Cornwall is concerned, there is an interesting thing here, because certainly in West Cornwall, there was a strong link with the Caribbean, because the packets, the ships that carried the mail, would go from Falmouth over to the West Indies. And so quite a number of West Indian proprietors came to Cornwall in the 18th century, and they brought along a lot of their slaves as well.
Okay.
We think that as far as Penzance and Madron is concerned, there are about 35 people with Sir Rose Price-Bart who built what Trent Wayton is today. And so I think that with the Cornish, there may be a kind of quite a numbers of us who have right at the back a few African genes, and I'm sure that you'll get a very, very welcome in Cornwall if you come. So thank you very much for a superb introduction to your country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed for a really enlightening talk. You talked about your own venture with DNA, courtesy of your wife. Do you know if there are any other projects involving the wardens, bones, whatever you like to call them, to specifically try and identify any DNA links? Do you know if there's anything planned?
So I'm happy to say that there's been that once this initiative and this story got back to Cayman, the amount of interest and connection with Caymanians, Bodens and Wattlers, Ebanks, and others. This has sparked extreme interest in Cayman. And whilst a lot of families are doing things individually, we have yet to do it collectively or to put some organization behind it. I will say that I have been actively trying to engage with Ancestry.com simply because I think they are the world's leader. I know there's many others, but I believe that Ancestry.com has the most to offer. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to break through their bureaucracy. But I don't give up. That being said, what we plan to do with the Boddens and the Wattlers specifically is to look at their individual family trees to see where they connect and advance the initiative.
My question is that we've heard from far away that the Philippines Islands have a problem with the snow on the North Pole is melting and the sea is rising. Do you have the same sort of problem?
The simple answer is absolutely. The Cayman Islands is, for the most part, the average height is 8 feet above sea level. And whilst we're very small, again, 100 square miles, only 65,000 people, the Premier of the Cayman Islands was over in London this week attending parts of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and he made interventions specifically to that. And it's as he said, it's not really the effects of global warming, whilst they affect us in low-lying areas and small island nations very much. There is truly very little we can do about it. So it's encouraging and bringing awareness to larger countries that have a far greater footprint in relation to impacting global warming or reducing global warming. So that's where we are concentrating on. But absolutely, it does affect us greatly.
Where do you get your drinking water these days?
Through technology, desalinization. Yes, so from the ocean. Sir.
Where did they get the water from in the first place? You know, back in the day when you didn't have this technology.
And my wife is French, and she was asking me the same thing as I was practicing this with her, and I don't know. I'm sorry to say, I'll have to. That's a question for my father. I honestly don't know, sir.
I think, Eric, that when there was the wreck of the 10 sails, there's a fascinating record from the
book
from the captain of the Royal Navy ship, who reported back to his superiors in the Royal Navy that the islanders were so poor they couldn't even afford to give the sailors water.
Yeah.
They didn't have enough themselves. That's just how appalling the conditions were at the time. So I think the answer was it was very hard to come by.
Yeah, it's the collection of rainwater from. But Charles, you had.
Yes, when I was growing up, we had two sources of water supply. So each house that was built like guttering around the V-shaped roof, and the rain would pour into the guttering, which led then to a cistern. Right, a cistern that was under the house or next to the house. So we collected rainwater like that. Then we also had people who drilled wells. And we call the rainwater freshwater, but people could drill wells, and they would drill and drill and drill until they found a vein in the earth, and then connect a pump to it, to connect valves from that pump that then distributed water in various parts of the house. So we had brackish water for toilets and whatnot, washing and whatnot, and fresh water for drinking. Sometimes you have to drill 4 or 5 holes before you found a vein in the earth that had flowing water. But eventually you found it, and once filled up like you drip of oil, and then you connect your pump to it, sometimes the old days was a hand pump, eventually became an electric pump, which then spilled the water all around the house. So that's how I grew up. I love brackish water more than fresh water.
Thank you.
I can connect Cornwall to that last comment. I transcribed a Cornish diary from the 1863s of somebody building a house near the Lizard, And I was very puzzled by this heading on one day, because he had his diary and he was saying all the dates. The miners came today, but he'd capitalised the word miners. So it can be a surname. I was thinking, what on earth? 2 weeks later, the miners had finished blasting the well.
Wow.
So that's where he was getting his water for his new house.
Ah, thank you for that. Anybody else? I'm very conscious that I'm standing in between you and a delicious pasty, so I'm more than happy to continue the conversation with that. Thank you.